The story of America's founding is often romanticized, filled with tales of brave men who fought for liberty and justice against tyranny. We've all heard the heroic narratives of George Washington crossing the Delaware, Thomas Jefferson drafting the Declaration of Independence, and Benjamin Franklin flying his kite. However, behind the glossy pages of history textbooks and patriotic celebrations lies a darker truth. The founders of the United States of America committed their fair share of crimes. As we delve deeper, we must remember that history is complex. The founders were not one-dimensional figures, and their actions cannot be judged solely by today's standards. Still, it is essential to acknowledge the crimes and contradictions that mar the legacy of the nation's architects. In doing so, we gain a more comprehensive understanding of the birth of the United States, humanizing the founders while recognizing their imperfections. The most glaring and inexcusable crime of the founders was their complicity in the institution of slavery. Many of the key figures who championed liberty and equality were also slaveholders. George Washington, the father of the nation, owned hundreds of enslaved individuals throughout his lifetime. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence's famous words, "All men are created equal," was himself a slaveholder who fathered children with his enslaved mistress, Sally Hemings. These contradictions highlight the hypocrisy at the heart of America's founding. While the founders argued for freedom and independence from British tyranny, they simultaneously perpetuated a brutal system of human bondage. Slavery was not only an economic institution, but also a deeply entrenched social and cultural practice. The founders' participation in this institution reveals a stark contrast between their lofty ideals and their actions on the ground. The crimes committed against Native Americans are often overshadowed by the larger narrative of American independence. However, the colonization and westward expansion of the United States involved the forced displacement and violence against indigenous peoples. The founders, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, were instrumental in pushing westward expansion and passing policies that disenfranchised Native Americans. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson but rooted in the policies and attitudes of earlier founders, led to the infamous Trail of Tears. Thousands of Cherokee and other Native American tribes were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. The impact of these policies can still be seen today in the social, economic, and cultural disparities that continue to affect Native American communities. While the founders championed the principles of free speech and a free press, they did not always practice what they preached. In 1798, during John Adams's presidency, the Federalist-controlled Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, a set of laws that restricted the rights of immigrants and curtailed criticism of the government. These acts were aimed primarily at silencing opposition from Jeffersonian Republicans. The Sedition Act, in particular, made it a crime to write, print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government or its officials. Several newspaper editors and political opponents were prosecuted and imprisoned under these laws. This infringement on free speech and political dissent contradicted the founders' rhetoric of democratic ideals and freedom of expression. The economic system established by the founders also had its dark side. While they championed individual liberty and the pursuit of happiness, many of the founders were part of an elite class that profited from the labor of others. The economic disparities of the time were significant, and the working class often lived in squalid conditions with little access to education, healthcare, or political representation. One glaring example is the Shays' Rebellion of 1786-1787 in Massachusetts, where impoverished farmers revolted against oppressive taxes and debt collection. The rebellion exposed the economic disparities and injustices of the time, leading to concerns among the founders about the stability of the new nation. This led to the Constitutional Convention, where a more centralized government was created, albeit one that still protected the interests of the economic elite. While the founding documents of the United States proclaimed principles of equality and justice, they conspicuously omitted the rights of women. The founders, despite their rhetoric of liberty, did not extend these principles to women in their time. Women were excluded from political participation, property ownership, and legal rights. Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, famously wrote to her husband in 1776, "Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." Her plea for women's rights went largely unheeded by the founders, and it would take many years of struggle and activism before significant progress was made in advancing women's rights. In examining the crimes of the founders of the United States, we must acknowledge the complexity of history. The founders were not mere villains, nor were they flawless heroes. They were human beings with their own flaws and contradictions, living in a time vastly different from our own. It is essential to recognize their accomplishments in creating a new nation and the democratic ideals they espoused. At the same time, we must not ignore the crimes they committed, which include perpetuating slavery, displacing Native Americans, suppressing dissent, exploiting the working class, and denying women's rights. These actions remind us that history is not a fairy tale, but a nuanced tapestry of human actions and consequences. As we reflect on the crimes of the founders, we should not use them as a reason to dismiss the ideals of liberty, equality, and justice that the United States was founded upon. Instead, we should use their imperfections as a reminder that the pursuit of a more perfect union requires constant vigilance and a commitment to addressing the injustices that persist in our society today. In doing so, we honor the true spirit of the American experiment, acknowledging both its bright moments and its dark chapters, and working toward a future where the principles of liberty and justice truly apply to all. If you liked this video, like and subscribe for more.